I know it's kind of difficult to understand because a lot of times people will say environmental justice and I think this happened a long time ago when people were trying to find a neutral phase, and so very often they'll say environmental justice when they mean environmental racism, right? And so what we would call, where I live, a traditional EJ community, non-traditional EJ community, is when there's an overburdening near a population of folks, usually black, brown, or white poor, and they have a concentration of refineries or chemical plants or things like that. So basically, we're talking about, to me, in my head, it's the same as, like, say, police brutality against a certain population, but in this way, it's a slow death and a slow murder. So how do we, the question of environmental justice is, how do we find equity in safety for people who have been attacked in this way by using the environment against them, or these corporations that are making ridiculous amounts of money off the backs of their health? For sure. So when the BP oil spill happened, I was at home with my kids, and like I said, I've always really, really cared about the environment, but this was when I realized, oh, like, it's not a situation where you can just continue to write a check to Greenpeace and let them take care of it, That's when I actually had the opportunity to go down and to be a part of the response, I guess, in some ways, And I was, at that time, I was doing reporting for a little local paper where I live. And we were invited by BP to come down and see but they only showed us what they wanted us to see, which, by the way, was very little oil and a lot of the, LSU football coach, and I met the governor and all that. And there was partying and fun stuff. And we saw a little of the oil birds and all that. But really, when it came down to how was this oil spill going to affect people, they really didn't include people, right? And I'm a features writer, and so I went back the next week and I jumped on a boat with the actual fisherman and his little boy. And I asked him, to go show me, like, where the oil is. And when we got out there, it was like, I always say it was like a more than a bad dream, like a horror story, like those nightmares that you get into, and it just keeps coming and coming, and you can't get away from it. Pretty soon, this oil was like peanut butter, basically just surrounded the boat. Couldn't go very fast, and so we ended up, just tootling along, and we came upon this pelican that was in the water. And it was having convulsions and dying, but at the time we actually thought we could get it to Fort Jackson where they were cleaning the birds. Again, you can't go very fast in oil, and so there wasn't much that we could do, and it really pretty quickly came down to where we realized this bird we were gonna lose it, So we just idled down the boat, and we just sat there together with this bird, and prayed, and this 300-pound Cajun fisherman was just in tears. Like, how was he was just facing his own the reality of the situation, like how were they going to continue to support his family, not just because they made money off of the they lived off of the ocean, it was like everything that they ate came out of that water, and it ended up where eventually that same fisherman and his little boy ended up having to move away from the coast because the little boy was so allergic to the dispersants that they used in the water. Ended up getting lesions and having asthma attacks and things like that. Well, that to me was the first eye-opener. I came back and I remember looking in the mirror and saying to myself, wow, like, first of all, realizing that the earth is so fragile and that things can be lost so quickly and how that can affect us. But even more so, how did I contribute to this, and what was I not doing? If I'm going to protect my kids and say that I'm their protector and that I'm going to raise them, how was I contributing to this problem and what I consumed or how I dealt with things? And I realized at that point, like I said, that I couldn't just leave it to these organizations to do, that there was something that I could do and that I needed to do about this. And so that went on for about a year. And I just saw time and again how this company, BP in particular, was able to just roll over people like nobody. I mean, it was all about their money. It was all about their show, up to the highest levels of government, to where you have the president even coming out and saying, it's done, it's all cleaned up, and we're standing in oil at the same time, where I live. And so I was like, well, so I wanted to just expose that, honestly. So we did this walk in 2011 from New Orleans to DC, and it was just to tell, to share with people along the way and expose the fact that, no, the oil is not cleaned up, it's still there. But man, on that walk, I walked through mountaintop removal, open air toxic pits, uranium mining, fracking, like all these different, and I realized, oh my gosh, it's not just in It's not just in the Gulf. Like, this is a huge issue, like all the way across, all across the nation. And I would go to a place where they would say, and it would be like middle class white folks, and they would say, yeah, we almost had that one of a dump like that here that could have blah blah blah, but we got rid of them. And I'd say, well, how did you get rid of them? And they'd say, oh, well, we voted people into office that really didn't want it, and blah blah blah. Well, then I'd walk 80 more miles up, and it'd be like a poor black community, and they'd be like, well, they're building this big that, and it'd be the same company. What they did was they just moved 80 miles up to a population that works. There was a working class population. They didn't have the opportunity, they didn't have the time nor energy to go and fight this, and so that was really the ability for the corporation to come in and to open this this place that would eventually, we all knew, cause cancers and destroy people. And that's when I realized, wow, this disparity amongst, it's not just a situation where you just need to teach these people how to fight. It's a situation where these people do not have the means, nor is there the political will in their area to fight, and how consistently it ends up in these populations who don't have that opportunity in order to defend themselves. So with direct action, you get a lot of folks that are like, and I just need to say that it wasn't like immediately I went to this place where I was just like, I'm just going to chain myself to this. Oh, no, not by any means. Like I went through the whole gamut of, well, we'll get a petition. Oh, well, we just need people to know about it. People know about it now. So we went on TV and we did all this stuff. People knew about it, nothing changed, and then we were like, well, policy, we talked to the governor, and we did, I went up there during legislative sessions and whatever, and I realized at a certain point that there was no way for me as a poor mother of six, single mother even, to be able to get over the mountain of their money. I just couldn't do it, and it's unfortunate that in a country that prides itself on justice being equal, that's absolutely not the truth, never has been the truth, but even in particular with environmental justice movements, it's unattainable, to be honest. And so that was the first time I ever did direct action, was an act of civil disobedience where we brought tar balls that were coming up on the beaches back to BP. And I just kept saying, well, this is yours. We're just giving it back to you, And they ended up having, we said down we weren't going to leave until they took their tar balls back. And of course they had us arrested, That was the first time, and since then there's been 12 more times that, and in each of those times was a situation to where I felt like in my heart that the sacrifice was worth it in order to uplift the need, or in order to, to gain access to certain places, So, for instance, we did that one at BP within this last year. I want to say there's been 4 or 5 different times all around the Bayou Bridge pipeline, and not in a good number of those, the majority of those, I didn't mean to get arrested. It wasn't a situation where I was like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to get arrested to make a point. It was a situation where this is wrong. I'm going to point out that it's wrong, and in the meantime, as a byproduct of that, and somebody told me this the other day, if they can't beat you, they're going to do this other, they're going to take you into custody, they're going to attack you in all these ways. And so it was more of a situation where I didn't go in with the idea that I was going to get, I would love to not go to jail. Jail is very uncomfortable, and I really don't wish anybody had to go to jail. I wish we would abolish prison systems. It just doesn't work. It's cruel. But in this way, to me, that's been a part of the sacrifice that I've given in order to, I guess, be a living example of how deeply I feel that it's going to take for us to find justice for our groups, and also to find some sort of protection for my kids. There's another situation that people need to understand about organizing in the Deep South, which means it's not just where you're putting your reputation on the line like in other places. You're literally putting your life on the line, and you're putting the life of your family on the line. And if you don't speak out in a way that's large enough that you have enough eyes that are looking at you, then you're actually putting yourself in danger and putting your family into danger. I don't know how many times I've heard people say something that I knew was the right thing, and that person just go missing. Or that person, or that person be threatened to the point where they're going to lose their job, or they're going to, the other day, someone had mentioned, kids go missing quite a bit, whatever, to another advocate, I don't know. And it's just things like that, those little things that get said or whatever, And so that you have to pull the light back. My friend Dick Gregory, who passed away here last year, one of the things that he really taught me was, you know, he said cockroaches run from the light, and it's just so important. And direct action as a tool to bring the light so people can see the injustice is invaluable. And also, I mean, really, when it comes down to it, like, they only care about their bottom line, and costing them dollars on their bottom line is effective. Yeah, my great grandmother told me a story one time about, well, she talked about our ancestors that were on the Trail of Tears, and I kept asking her, I was like, well, what did they do in order, like, I would just not leave. I would just go hide. I would just go blah, blah, blah. And she's like, well, you know, one way that they were able to move people is they poisoned the water. They poisoned the wells there, so that you had no choice but to leave. If you wanted to live, you wanted to leave, you had to leave, you know. And that sort of assault is just a small part of what's been happening to indigenous populations all on, whether it's uranium mining or open air pit, it doesn't matter. The point is that they've been able to control entire groups of populations by poisoning the environment in that area, right? And so it has been way more than 50 years. It's been since colonization began that resistance has been happening in indigenous populations. And I know that you know, people talk about like trauma, and how trauma like is passed down from generation to generation. It's in your blood, but that resistance is in your blood too. And if you can feel it, like we try to do when we're in ceremony, then you can say that, you know, that connecting to that part of you, which has for generations upon generations survived. And it doesn't matter who you are, honestly. I think indigeneity is an easy one, but really, if you're here right now, if you're alive, it's because somebody fought damn hard to make it happen, because life wasn't easy. There was a time when people didn't make it to 20, you know, and somebody scratched and clawed and worked and fought and struggled and denied their lack of humanity and said that I'm worth it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have ever made it here, right? And so I know that as much as we all probably have trauma in our DNA, we also always have that level of resistance. It's just we see it a lot in indigenous populations, because the oppression that's happened, and in black populations too, the oppression that's happened has been so intense and so much to get over, that of course we have those skills, those feeling, and that's all like running up in our DNA, right? And also, this is our land. Like, regardless of who decides they living here, when it really comes down to it, in the blood of this so-called country, or in all of Turtle Island, it's red blood. I mean, that's the truth, you know. Only for the last 200 or 300 years has there been anything else. So of course I'm going to protect my grandmother's land. I mean, there's no other choice, you know. And I mean, I think having that consciousness, that level of consciousness, is now spreading. Now we're all seeing that. And so that's why we see so many 2,000 people or whatever come to a training where they want to, like, you know, figure out how to do better and to get out there and fight. Something's definitely happening, and it's all happening because this is where we're supposed to be, and this is what we've been brought to. So here we are. So I think that, first of all, I need young people to know that they're leaders now, and I need older people to know that young people are leaders now. There's no reason that we have to go through 18 or 22 years in order for someone to become a leader. We're seeing it with what's her name, Greta, in other countries. What's her name, Greta? Gretna's where I live. And we see it in the 21 youth with our Children's Trust that are fighting climate change right now. You know, the youngest one was 11, but when he started, he was 8 years old, you know. My daughter's a part of it. She was 12 years old, now she's 15. But the point is that we just need to stop disempowering our youth, and not understanding that it is okay for them to have that idea of value of themselves. In fact, that's what we want. That's what we always ask them to do. We ask them to value themselves enough to do good in school, to make good decisions, you know, whatever. But then we don't give them the lead when they decide that I'm valuable enough to have a clean air and to clean water and to have a good earth. And that's just not fair. We need to get out of the way and let them, and be resources for them in order to do the work. You don't have to wait. You can do it now. If it's something that you're passionate about, then get up and make it happen. And the older folks in your life need to help you. And if they can't, then go find someone else.
So you touched on it?
Yeah, one of the beautiful things about IEN is just that you can see bringing indigenous people together. And also, it's having that sort of community as indigenous people. There's very specific instances when it's just good to, you can tell when you're at an indigenous group and when you're at like a conference or whatever. It's just in the loving way that people take care of each other and make sure that everyone's safe or whatever. And also just having that background and that knowledge of the oppression that we've all shared, you know, whatever, and our ancestry, of course, the way we do things. And IEN has been a great place, a platform for that to happen. I don't, like throughout Standing Rock, you know, even if there's a situation where they weren't at the forefront necessarily sometimes of the action itself, but they were always lifting the action and not just spreading it amongst like indigenous people, but like raising that to a level that even the national news, the national consciousness was able to be aware of. If that is the only role of IEN, it is one of the most important roles that we